When federal agents move to clear our streets of high-risk criminals, why do some elected officials fight to stop them?
That is really the pivotal question here, isn't it? It pits federal law enforcement's mission to protect public safety against these local political policies that sometimes actively get in the way.
And that's the core tension we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into a recent major enforcement action, specifically Operation Metro Surge up in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
Right. And we're going to compare the claims from an agency like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to the actual empirical data that they say validates their whole approach.
Our mission is to cut straight through the rhetoric. We're looking at the facts presented by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and some powerful academic research that seems to back up ICE's strategy.
And for you, the listener, the question is this: are these enforcement policies just driven by politics, or are they a necessary evidence-based response to, documented threats to community safety?
Okay, so let's start with the news hook. December 2025, ICE launches Operation Metro Surge in the Twin Cities. It's targeting unauthorized individuals who have pretty extensive criminal records. The message from D.C. was immediate.
Oh, it was a direct political salvo. You had DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin come right out and say that ICE had arrested, and I'm quoting here, some of the worst criminal illegal aliens, including child sex offenders, domestic abusers, and violent gang members.
That language itself is a declaration.
Absolutely. It's a clear shot across the bow at the whole sanctuary city concept.
And she didn't mince words at all. McLaughlin directly blamed what she called sanctuary policies and politicians in Minnesota for letting these people, quote, roam the streets and terrorize Americans. So this wasn't just about arrests.
No, it was a political statement. And you have to remember, this is all happening while there are renewed calls for the Abolish ICE movement.
Right.
So this operation, it's basically the federal government's public response to that pressure.
Yeah.
They're trying to say, look, we are focused on protecting the community, and we have the data to prove why we target who we target.
Okay, let's unpack that then. When an agency launches a big enforcement surge like this, Operation Metro Surge, they're spending a ton of resources. What exactly did ICE find in Minneapolis that would justify that kind of expense and risk?
Well, the official press release, it details the arrest of 12 people. And the list of crimes they're associated with it's pretty intense. The goal for ICE is clearly to prove that worst of the worst classification.
So give us some specifics. What are the things that really jump out? This is the core of their public safety argument.
Absolutely. So the charges are severe. They're felonies that really hit at the core of a community's sense of safety. For instance, the list includes an arrest for criminal sexual conduct with a minor who was between 13 and 15 years old.
Yep.
Another one involved an arrest for aggravated assault with a weapon. And then you had an individual convicted of felony alien smuggling. These are not minor offenses.
And it's not just the big headline-grabbing crimes, right? It's often the constant high-frequency stuff that creates that perpetual fear.
That's a key point. Beyond those major felonies, the arrest really highlighted a pattern of chronic, dangerous behavior. You had multiple people arrested or convicted for domestic violence, 2 counts in one case.
Okay.
And then numerous convictions for assault, robbery, vehicle theft, and multiple DUIs. So these are exactly the repeat high-risk offenders the agency says it prioritizes.
And we heard about a gang connection, which, plays directly into the national security part of this.
Yes, they specifically pointed to Abdulkadir Sharif Abdi, a man from Somalia. They characterized him as a former member of the Gangster Disciples and a known current member of Vice Lord Nation.
So an active gang member.
According to them, yes. And while his past convictions were for things like fraud and receiving stolen property, that gang affiliation is what puts someone on the highest priority list for law enforcement.
And the message from the top, from people like White House border czar Tom Homan, was really firm. He said, we're going to enforce the laws of this country without apology.
That statement really defines the federal government's position. They see this kind of interior enforcement as completely non-negotiable.
Okay, so here's where the policy conflict really flares up, because ICE is saying they only target people here illegally who are a verifiable threat, but the operation immediately hit a wall of local resistance in Minneapolis.
Right, and this is that friction point that sanctuary policies create. Minneapolis officials, the mayor, the police chief, they all came out and publicly reaffirmed their status as a welcoming city.
Which means what in practice?
It means they explicitly do not cooperate with ICE on civil immigration enforcement. They refuse to use their local police or their jails to help federal agents.
And what's the tactical impact of that refusal on the ground?
It completely changes how ICE has to operate. So normally, if a high-priority person gets arrested by local cops for, say, aggravated assault, ICE issues what's called a detainer.
Okay.
When that person's jail time is up, ICE can take custody right there in a controlled environment, the jail. It's safe, it's efficient. But when local officials refuse to honor those detainers,
Then ICE has to find them out in the community.
exactly, they're forced to do these much costlier, more complex, and often more disruptive at large arrests, at a workplace, at a home. It's more dangerous for everyone involved.
And that uses up way more federal resources, I assume.
Precisely. And that refusal to cooperate is exactly what DHS Assistant Secretary McLaughlin blamed for allowing criminals to roam the streets, because local policy forces the federal government into this public cat-and-mouse game.
So let's pivot from the headlines to the bigger policy question. What is the empirical justification for this? ICE claims their strategy is based on science, not just, a few scary anecdotes.
Right. And their core strategy is built on a specific risk assessment model. Federal policy puts a much higher priority on finding and removing unauthorized immigrants who have been previously removed from the country before.
Why that group specifically?
The thinking is that this group poses a high relative risk to public safety. They've shown a disregard for federal law not just once, by entering unlawfully, but twice, by violating a formal removal order and coming back.
And this isn't just a gut feeling. You mentioned there's some serious research that validates this, the RAND study.
This is the critical piece of evidence. It was a rigorous 9-year follow-up study of criminally involved unauthorized immigrants, and it specifically looked at recidivism rates. The finding was, well, it was unambiguous.
Okay, let's get into those numbers, because they really do change the conversation about how you allocate resources.
Let's start with the risk multiplier. Compared to immigrants in a similar situation who had never been removed, those with a prior removal on their record were 2.62 times more likely to be rearrested over that 9-year period.
2.62 times. That is not a small margin.
No, it's a huge statistical flag. If you're a policymaker deciding where to spend limited enforcement dollars, that number tells you everything. It says focus on the previously removed person for the biggest impact on preventing future crime.
So the act of defying a removal order is actually a better predictor of future crime than maybe even the initial crime itself?
That's what the data suggests. Yeah. It's a powerful indicator of intent.
And what about the actual likelihood of reoffending? Are we talking about a high risk, or is it closer to a certainty?
For this specific high-priority group, the rate is shockingly high. A staggering 91% of the previously removed immigrants were rearrested at least once during the 9 years of the study.
91%.
91. Compare that to 64% of the group who were never removed. The data strongly suggests that the vast majority of people who were removed once and then come back are committing more crimes.
So it's not random targeting at all. It's using evidence to focus on the group that is demonstrably most likely to cause more harm.
That's the argument, yes. And it's not just that they get rearrested, it's how often. The previously removed group averaged 4.5 new arrests over the 9 years. The other group averaged just 2.9. It's a robust justification.
Now, we have to address the complexity here. Because even with this clear data, the enforcement guidelines themselves say officials have to look at more than just a conviction. They need to assess the totality of the facts.
They absolutely do. DHS guidance tells personnel to determine if the person poses a current threat to public safety. It's not just about the past. They have to weigh aggravating factors against mitigating ones.
And the aggravating factors are what you'd expect. A serious criminal record, the severity of the offense.
Right. The hard data side. But then there are mitigating factors, and this is where the human judgment comes in.
And that's where the friction comes from.
That's it. Factors that favor not enforcing include evidence of rehabilitation, the amount of time that's passed since an offense, and how long they've been in the U.S. An agent can't just look at a 10-year-old conviction and call it a day.
And we see that tension play out perfectly in the case of Abdulkadir Sharif Abdi, the alleged gang member arrested in this operation.
Exactly. ICE used his past, the fraud, the theft, the active gang membership, to justify making him a high-priority arrest.
But his wife had a very different story.
She did. She argued publicly that he'd been sober for 13 years and was actively working at a local homeless shelter, trying to serve the community.
So the question for policymakers becomes, when does the fact that he was once a vice lord get outweighed by 13 years of sobriety and community work?
And that is the heart of the challenge. those mitigating factors, under DHS's own guidelines, should weigh against enforcement. It shows that even when you target an empirically high-risk group, these individual assessments can create a lot of community friction and public scrutiny.
Okay, let's shift to the political arena. The mission seems clear use data to focus on high-risk individuals, but there's a strong political movement that wants to just dismantle the agency entirely.
We're talking about the Abolish ICE movement. It's a left-wing political effort that really gained mainstream traction after the family separation policy controversy back in 2018.
And what's their core argument?
That the agency, which was created after 9/11 in 2003, is just fundamentally flawed, that it lacks accountability and has pursued tactics that are way too aggressive and end up harming communities.
And the demand is to just break it up.
Essentially, yes. Dismantle it and fold its duties back into other existing agencies, kind of like how it was before 2003. They argue that would allow for more humane and proportionate enforcement.
But this is an incredibly polarizing issue.
One of the most. National polling from 2018 showed public support for ICE was almost perfectly split down party lines. 72% of Republicans had a favorable view, while 72% of Democrats had an unfavorable view.
And politicians have definitely leaned into that. I remember then President Trump predicted that any Democrat campaigning to abolish ICE would get, quote, beaten so badly in elections.
Right, and that prediction really highlights how effectively the political right has framed the issue.
Yeah.
To them, abolishing ICE is the same as ignoring the public safety risk from criminals. And that framing makes press releases about sex offenders and gang numbers a very powerful political tool.
Which brings us right back to Minneapolis and the sanctuary policies. Does this local opposition inadvertently put communities at greater risk by choosing politics over public safety data?
Well, the argument from law enforcement is that it does in a couple of ways. We saw local leaders openly refuse to cooperate. They warned residents about the raids, offered legal resources.
That creates two big problems for safety.
It does. First, like we said, it forces ICE into those more dangerous at-large arrests. But second, and this is maybe more important, when local police take a non-cooperation stance, it can actually suppress crime reporting from immigrant communities themselves.
How so?
If you're an undocumented resident and you're afraid that calling the police about a domestic abuser or a robbery might lead to your own deportation, you stop reporting crime.
So in an effort to protect some people, local governments might inadvertently damage the ability of their own police to protect all citizens because they've eroded that basic trust.
Exactly. The entire community becomes less safe. The goal might be to make immigrants feel welcomed, but the functional outcome can be a greater criminal threat for everybody.
So to summarize this deep dive, we've seen that ICE operations are justified by this core mission targeting threats to national security, public safety, and border security.
And crucially, that this mission is strongly backed by that RAND research. It shows that individuals who ignore a removal order have a 91% likelihood of being rearrested.
The empirical case for targeted interior enforcement is pretty clear. Focus your limited resources on the people who are demonstrably 2.62 times more likely to be rearrested. It's about maximizing crime prevention.
The challenge, though, remains in the application. How do you balance that clear statistical risk with evidence of an individual's rehabilitation, like we saw in the Abdi case?
The existence of a federal agency will always be up for political debate. But when local politics actively obstruct a federal agency that is using empirical data to focus on high-risk repeat offenders, you have to ask yourself, are those local policies genuinely serving the safety of their citizens, or are they prioritizing an ideological stance over validated public safety measures?
The data suggests that blocking targeted enforcement means accepting a higher rate of crime in your community. And that's the trade-off local leaders have to face.
A really challenging question, especially when the statistics are that stark. Thanks for diving deep with us today.